Aloha. I'm Carl Bonham, the Executive Director at UHERO, and I'm here with another UHERO focused video. We're not in the UH Film Studio this time. That's under renovation, so we'll be doing some from various locations. This focus video is to share results from our Maui Recovery Survey, and that's been ongoing, supported by the Hawaii Community Foundation for about a year now. And we are releasing a report that provides detail on progress and on vulnerabilities as we hit the 2-year anniversary of the Maui wildfires. So let's just jump right into the data. As I said, there's been some progress, and the title points to ongoing vulnerabilities. If you were to measure your progress based on whether people have been able to return to their homes and to West Maui, then progress has been slow. Right, remaining as of today, there are almost 80% of the fire-impacted households remain displaced from West Maui, and quarter are not. This shouldn't be a surprise, given that only about 45 homes have been rebuilt in Lahaina. But the data should begin to improve pretty markedly over the next year, because there's 400 something permits have been issued. About 300 homes are under construction. Another 185 or so permits are in the pipeline, and so there should be a market improvement in people returning to West Maui, and particularly Lahaina, over the next year. And then the second row here shows, the survey is not just for people who lived in West Maui, but also people who worked there or owned businesses there, and they may not have necessarily lived in West Maui. And so if they've been displaced from their homes, it's more than likely it's for economic reasons. And so that still remains about a third of impacted households in the rest of Maui who remain displaced. And that kind of points to one of the not so positive aspects of this report, is that the economic progress has been much lower even than housing and other areas of recovery. And so let's focus on some of the good news. The good news is, while there still remain 40% of households living in temporary housing, that's down from about 50% at the end of last year. And there has been a relatively steady increase in the proportion of respondents who are in permanent housing now, and a relatively steady halving of households who are in very unstable housing situations, say living with auntie or family and friends, or even unhoused. And that's a real positive, because we know that housing instability is directly related to food insecurity and mental health issues and poor family dynamic. And there's other good news that for those 40% who are in temporary housing, they have a more stable situation than they did a year ago. If you could look back a year ago, this is the proportion of respondents who had been in their temporary housing for more than a year. And of course, then that wouldn't have made much sense. It was only a year after the fire, but this has grown steadily. And so even people who are in temporary housing now, roughly half of them have been there for longer than a year, increasing overall housing stability. So that's a real positive. Of course, we know rents surged post-wildfire, and the good news is they have been coming down, not as sharply as you might like, but given that so little housing has actually been added to the permanent housing stock, this shouldn't be much of a surprise, and it just points to the need to sort of double down on continuing to add housing, and particularly multifamily housing. If you look at the smallest units, their rents have come down pretty sharply, but they're still 50% higher than they were pre-fire. And as you go into larger and larger units, you look at the largest units of 3 bedrooms, 3+ bedrooms, their rents have barely budged. And excuse me, and they're paying roughly double what they were pre-fire. And so, this shows what would be paid, and not everybody is paying those, right? So about a third of households who are receiving substantial rental assistance are actually paying no rent. And if you look at the affordability issue, there's sort of a story of two households. There's the households that are eligible and are receiving nearly full subsidies for their housing. That's the column on the left. And for that group, almost three quarters are paying less in rent than they did pre-fire because of all of the housing assistance. Despite the high rents, the subsidies are offsetting that. And then in contrast, people who aren't eligible or haven't negotiated the process or for whatever reason aren't receiving sort of a full housing subsidy, over half of them are paying more in rent than they did pre-fire. And so it's a very different situation. There's vulnerabilities amongst those who are not receiving assistance. And as we progress into 2026 and some of these assistance programs for rents sunset, even the folks who right now may be paying no rent are going to begin to face additional financial burdens. And that comes at a time when I mentioned earlier, the economy is probably the weak part of this recovery. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the share of people working full time amongst fire impacted households, pre-fire, roughly 2/3 of households were working full time. Now it's less than half, 45% are working full time. And the unemployed is more than 3 times higher than it was pre-fire. And this compares to a Maui County-wide unemployment rate in June of about 3%. And then, of course, many people have also left the labor force or chose to retire early because of the impacts of the fire. And if you want to point towards a reason for this lingering economic situation, it really you have to point to tourism. And this chart is actually from the UHERO data portal. This is real Maui County visitor spending. And you can see that after a pretty sharp jump in late fall, early winter, 2023-24, the progress has really just gone sideways. If you squint, you can see there is a upward sloping line here, but in the May-June data, real visitor spending, so spending adjusted for inflation, is 20% below where it was in the May-June data of 2023 before the fire. And so then it shouldn't be any surprise that, of the fire-affected households that were working in the visitor industry, roughly 2/3 remain in the visitor industry. Many left the visitor industry. Fortunately, there were jobs available elsewhere in Maui because of the tight labor market. Now they're unlikely to be earning the same income that they earned in their previous employment, and a full 19% are unemployed. And so, really, I think this points to a serious need for all levels of government and the industry and the community to pull together and do whatever is possible to promote a return of visitor dollars to Maui County to put people back to work. And there has been a release of funding to promote Maui. And so we're hopeful that this winter that'll begin to show signs of progress and, as I said, put people back to work. So if you have a situation where rents remain high and assistance is beginning to go away, as you would expect, there's the initial assistance during the emergency, then there's during the recovery. It's sort of a long process, but the assistance levels come down, and this is particularly potentially challenging in 2026 as rental assistance goes away. Right now, what we're seeing is that compared to any time during the post-wildfire period, compared to second quarter of 2025, assistance has been roughly halved, or the proportion of survey respondents who are receiving assistance has been cut in roughly half. And as of second quarter, roughly 44% of households are not receiving any assistance. And so, again, this points towards the need to sort of double down on housing as we see an end in sight to rental assistance in a world where rents remain elevated. So to summarize, some of the fire-affected households are continuing to face serious challenges, even as others are seeing increased stability in housing and food security, in employment situation. And this just points to the need for ongoing information. That's the purpose of this survey. We'll keep running the survey for at least another year to try to provide that near real-time data on the situation on the ground and to help with planning. There's much more data in the Maui Recovery dashboard on our website, and I hope you'll check that out. Mahalo.